Calvin Brooks walked into the grocery store already tired, the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes and never really leaves. The morning had started with a small win, the message that his prescription was finally ready, and he held on to that like a lifeline, because his week had been stacked with delays, mislabels, and hold music. He was a black veteran in his early 60s, broad shoulders softened by time, posture still disciplined, voice usually calm even when his thoughts were not. His body moved a little slower now, but his instincts still moved fast. He came for ordinary things: milk, chicken, fruit. The prescription that kept his heart steady. Nothing that should have turned into a scene. Nothing that should have brought uniforms and radios into an aisle full of cereal. The store was bright in a way that always felt slightly harsh. Fluorescent lights that made skin look pale and shiny. Clean floors that reflected movement. Music that pretended the world was light and simple. Calvin took a basket because he preferred not to push a cart. Carts made him feel boxed in. He moved through produce and dairy with the same quiet focus he used for everything, checking dates, choosing the least bruised fruit, pausing once with his hand on the edge of a shelf as a small wave of dizziness passed. He blamed it on not eating enough breakfast. He did not like admitting that his body had its own opinions now. At the pharmacy counter, the line was short, which felt like mercy. He waited his turn and slid his driver's license across when the pharmacy tech requested identification. It was a normal request. It was a normal piece of plastic. Worn corners, faint scratches, the quiet signs of years in a wallet that had been opened at banks and clinics and rental counters without drama. The pharmacy tech's eyes changed when she looked at it. Not panic, not anger, just that tiny hesitation that makes a moment feel fragile. Her gaze flicked toward the end of the counter, and Calvin's chest tightened because he knew that look. He had seen it at store entrances, at checkouts, at hotel desks, the look that quietly calls for backup. A manager approached quickly, not strolling, not curious, but certain. White man, mid-30s, rigid posture, clean polo, name tag catching the light. His face carried the kind of confidence that grows when people around you are used to deferring. He did not start with a greeting. He did not ask what Calvin needed. He picked up the license and held it up as if the air itself might reveal a secret. Calvin felt the room shift. The pharmacy tech went still. A customer behind him leaned slightly to see. Someone nearby slowed their cart. The store kept playing cheerful music, but the atmosphere tightened, and Calvin's body recognized the change before his mind could fully name it. The manager examined the license longer than necessary. He rotated it and squinted at it like he wanted to find an excuse. Calvin watched the manager's hands and kept his own visible. He hated that he still had to think like this, even in a grocery store, even on a Tuesday morning. The accusation arrived with the casual certainty of someone who believed his suspicion counted as proof. The manager treated the license like contraband and treated Calvin like the person who brought it in on purpose. The manager did not explain what exactly was wrong. He did not point to a mismatch or an obvious defect. He simply framed the situation as fraud. He escalated the moment from an ID check to a moral judgment, as if Calvin had come to steal rather than to buy. Calvin asked for clarification in a steady voice, trying to keep the interaction grounded in facts. The manager did not answer the question. The manager shifted to authority, to policy, to control. The license did not come back across the counter. The prescription did not come forward from the bin behind the glass. The manager's body language said that Calvin was no longer a customer. He was a problem to manage in front of an audience. Calvin requested his license back again, still calm, still slow. The manager refused and spoke about store policy as if a sentence alone could become reality. Calvin's pulse sped up. He could feel heat rise behind his eyes, anger mixed with something that felt like grief. He had served his country. He had stood in lines in places far more dangerous than a suburban grocery store. Now he was standing under fluorescent lights while a stranger decided he looked like someone who would commit fraud. The manager's next move was not to call a supervisor at the pharmacy or to run a simple verification. The next move was to bring law enforcement into the store. The manager set the scene up like a trap, making the accusation public, making the stakes higher, making Calvin's smallest movement feel risky. Calvin felt the old training activate in his bones. Slow hands, no sudden reach, no argument that could be twisted into hostility. Calm face even when the inside is burning. Customers drifted closer without admitting they were watching. A phone appeared at chest height in the background, angled toward the counter. Calvin noticed a camera dome above the pharmacy aisle and a small device beneath the counter that looked like it could carry audio. He did not know for sure, but his instincts kept circling the idea that the store was recording more than people realized. When the police arrived, the store turned into a stage. Two officers in uniform moved through the aisles with the confidence of people used to being obeyed. The manager met them immediately and framed the narrative fast, with the kind of certainty that tries to outrun doubt. He described fake identification, attempted fraud, and a customer who allegedly became difficult when challenged. The manager's voice and body language suggested danger, even though Calvin stood still, basket at his feet, palms open at waist level. Calvin explained the situation in short, controlled sentences. He kept his voice low and even. He described the request for a prescription and the refusal to return his identification. He stated that the license was real and that he was willing to verify his identity through other means. He did not insult the manager. He did not raise his voice. He did not take a step forward. The officers examined the license and asked Calvin for basic details, confirming his address and date of birth. Calvin answered without hesitation. He provided additional identification that he carried for medical appointments, his veteran health card, an old employer badge from a factory job that had ended in retirement. These were not glamorous documents, but they carried consistency, the kind that real life accumulates over years. One of the officers asked the manager to explain what specific feature made the license appear fake. The manager's certainty wavered in that moment. The accusation had been built on a feeling, not on an observable fact. The manager leaned on vague language, on intuition, on the claim that the license looked off. The officer pressed for something concrete. The pharmacy tech was asked whether she had identified any actual defect. Her hesitation stretched too long and communicated more than her words did. She had not been sure. She had looked to the manager. The power of the scene began to tilt. Not fully, not safely, but enough for Calvin to feel it. The officer's posture shifted from enforcement to evaluation. The manager's posture shifted from authority to defensiveness. The crowd behind the aisle went quiet in that particular way people do when they sense the outcome might not match the performance. Eventually, the officers returned the license and instructed the pharmacy to release the medication. The manager complied, but his movements were tight, his face rigid, his control slipping and showing irritation beneath. The medication bag came across the counter as if it were being given under protest, and Calvin took it like it was both relief and insult. Calvin left the store with his groceries and his heartbeat still too fast. The walk through the parking lot felt longer than it should have. He sat in his car and stared at the entrance, hands on the steering wheel, trying to force his breathing to normalize. He felt the familiar shame that follows public suspicion, the shame that tries to convince you the scene happened because you did something wrong, even when you did not. His daughter Danielle called as he sat there. She heard the strain in his voice immediately. Danielle was the kind of woman who turned anger into organization. She worked in logistics and lived inside systems, inside timestamps, inside paper trails. She had watched her father swallow too much over the years, and she had decided she would not let that become normal. Danielle arrived quickly and asked Calvin to walk her through every moment. She wrote down the time, the location within the store, the manager's name, and the sequence of events. She asked whether there were cameras. Calvin confirmed. She asked whether there might have been audio at the counter. Calvin described the small device beneath the glass and the way the manager spoke into a headset. Danielle's expression tightened into something cold and controlled. She was already thinking beyond the incident. She was thinking about the story that would be written after it. That afternoon, Danielle filed a complaint with corporate. Not a rant, not a plea, but a precise record. She demanded preservation of all surveillance video from the relevant window, including audio if the system captured it. She demanded the store's written policy on confiscating identification. She requested the manager's incident report, any internal documentation, and the names of employees involved. She also filed a request with the police department for call logs and body camera footage from the response. Corporate responded quickly with polite language that said everything and nothing. The message expressed concern and promised review, but it avoided details, avoided commitments, avoided anything that could be used against them later. Danielle replied with a shorter email that carried a sharper edge. She requested confirmation in writing that all relevant video, audio, and internal communications were being preserved. She referenced the exact timestamp of the incident and made it clear that deletion after a preservation request would be treated as a serious issue. Calvin watched Danielle work and felt a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. He did not want to be the center of a case. He wanted to buy milk and pick up medication like anyone else. But the system had already made him the center. Now Danielle was forcing it to face that choice. Several days later, the police body camera footage arrived. Danielle and Calvin watched it in the living room with the curtains half drawn, as if daylight would make it easier to look away. The footage showed Calvin standing still, hands visible, voice controlled. It showed the manager speaking with certainty, calling the situation fraud without evidence. It captured the officer asking the manager for specifics and the manager's inability to provide them. It showed the prescription withheld until law enforcement pressure forced release. Calvin's calm was not just visible, it was undeniable. Danielle expected corporate to offer compensation and confidentiality. The playbook was old. Apologize without admitting fault. Offer a gift card or a private settlement. Require silence in exchange. The purpose would be to make the incident disappear before it could become a pattern in public. Corporate did request a meeting. They framed it as a chance to resolve concerns. Danielle agreed, but she brought an attorney. Not because she wanted drama, but because she wanted structure. Meetings create records. Records create consequences. The meeting took place in a small room above the store, a sterile space with a table and chairs that smelled faintly of stale coffee. A district manager attended in person. The store manager attended. A corporate risk representative joined by video. The district manager opened with polished words about valuing customers and taking concerns seriously. The store manager held himself like the victim of inconvenience. Danielle asked for the objective basis of the fake ID accusation. The store manager leaned on vague feelings, on the claim that the license looked wrong. Danielle asked what feature looked wrong. The store manager failed to provide a clear answer. Danielle asked why the identification was withheld. The store manager referenced policy again. Danielle asked to see the policy. It was not available. The meeting began to slide toward corporate fog, the kind that attempts to drown specific facts in general statements. Danielle refused to let it. She returned again and again to the tangible issues, the accusation, the refusal to return identification, the delay of medication, and the police call initiated without objective evidence. Then Danielle raised the topic that shifted the corporate representative's tone. She requested preservation of internal communications related to the incident, including manager group chats. The store manager reacted with dismissive certainty, as if the idea was absurd. Danielle did not argue. She simply restated the preservation request and asked corporate to confirm it in writing. The corporate representative's voice tightened. Corporate people do not fear anger as much as they fear documentation. 2 days after that meeting, Danielle received an email from an unfamiliar address. The message was brief and nervous, the kind of message that reads like it was typed with trembling hands. It came from a former assistant manager named Kendra, who said she had left the store months earlier and had watched a pattern of behavior that made her stomach turn. She described a manager group chat where employees joked about customers, shared security images, and celebrated police calls. She said the store manager had been particularly active. She said Calvin's incident had been discussed. Kendra said she had screenshots. Danielle's attorney moved quickly. Screenshots alone can be attacked, but screenshots paired with a witness statement and a preservation notice create a trap. Kendra agreed to provide an affidavit describing the group chat, who was in it, and how the screenshots were obtained. She provided the screenshots and explained the context. When Danielle opened them, the room went quiet in a different way than the grocery store had gone quiet. This quiet felt colder. The group chat showed managers trading jokes and labels, using coded language that made suspicion feel like sport. There were messages about customers being watched and tracked. There were comments that framed Black customers as risks by default. The words were casual, almost playful, which made them worse. It was not a momentary slip. It was culture. One message from the store manager stood out because it aligned with the incident so precisely. It described a veteran customer with a fake-looking ID at the pharmacy, treated like a scam attempt. The message framed the police call like a win. Other managers reacted with approval. Another message made it clear that the veteran hat had been noticed and mocked. The idea of service had been reduced to a prop. Then Danielle found something that made her skin tighten over her bones. A list within the chat, treated like an internal watch list. Names and short labels, nothing official on paper, but used with confidence. Calvin's name appeared on it, with a note that suggested pharmacy fraud risk. Calvin had never committed fraud. He had spent his life avoiding trouble, trying to live quietly, trying to do everything the right way so he would not be misread. Seeing his name on a list like that did something to him. It was not rage. It was a hollow feeling, as if he had been living in someone else's story without knowing it. The attorney filed a formal complaint with corporate legal and demanded preservation and production of internal communications. Corporate responded quickly with a familiar strategy. They suggested the screenshots could be fabricated. They offered compensation. They hinted at confidentiality. The attorney pushed back and requested the actual chat logs and device records, referencing Danielle's earlier preservation request. He made it clear that deletion after notice would expose the company to serious consequences. Corporate went quiet for a stretch that felt intentional. Then, corporate produced records. The produced logs matched the screenshots. The timestamps aligned. The membership list matched Kendra's description. The store manager's messages were there in full context. The pattern was visible, not just in one message, but in the rhythm of the conversation, the repeated suspicion, the repeated jokes, the repeated framing of police calls as victories. It became impossible to maintain the story that Calvin's incident was a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the product of a workplace culture where suspicion was normalized and reinforced in writing. Corporate placed the store manager on leave. The district manager shifted from polished empathy to cautious damage control. A separate investigator contacted Danielle and Calvin to gather statements. They asked Calvin to describe how the incident affected him, how it impacted his ability to access medication, how it felt to be treated like a criminal in a public space while strangers watched. Calvin described the physical stress, the humiliation, the fear of escalation, and the lasting effect of walking into a store and wondering who had already decided what you were. Corporate offered a written apology and a settlement. Calvin resisted the settlement until one detail was addressed: removal of his name from any internal list and confirmation that he would not be flagged in the system for future visits. The attorney demanded policy changes, retraining, and a formal prohibition on photographing or discussing customers in private channels. Corporate resisted until the attorney referenced the combination of body camera footage, internal logs, and a witness willing to testify. Corporate understood what would happen if the story became public with receipts. The store manager was terminated. Several supervisors received discipline. The company issued new procedures regarding identification checks, requiring objective criteria, documented steps, and limits on escalation. They clarified that identification could not be withheld without law enforcement direction. They added a process for customers to request a supervisor review without police involvement. They revised how pharmacy disputes were handled, emphasizing de-escalation, accessibility, and dignity. A written apology arrived addressed to Calvin by name. It acknowledged that the accusation was unfounded and that the escalation was inappropriate. It confirmed that internal communications related to customers were being restructured and monitored. It stated that the company was implementing policy changes to prevent repeat incidents. Calvin read the letter slowly at his kitchen table. He did not feel triumphant. He felt tired, and he felt lighter at the same time, as if someone had finally admitted that the weight he carried was real and not imagined. In the weeks that followed, Calvin went to a different pharmacy across town. The first time he walked in, his chest tightened, as if his body expected the same trap. He kept his hands visible without thinking. He moved slowly. He waited for the room to change. It did not. He presented his identification once, got his medication, paid, and left. No accusations, no raised eyebrows, no quiet sideways glance that called for backup. In the parking lot, he sat in the car for a moment and realized he had been holding his breath in stores for years, not because he was guilty of anything, but because other people's suspicion had been trained into the environment like background music. He exhaled. The incident had started with an accusation about a piece of plastic. It ended with something bigger, a private record of how power talks when it believes no one will ever force it into daylight. The manager group chats did what Calvin's calm could not do on its own. They exposed intent. They showed pattern. They proved that the story had been written before Calvin ever stepped into the aisle. Calvin did not win because he argued louder. He won because he stayed controlled long enough for the evidence to surface. He won because Danielle turned humiliation into documentation. He won because someone inside the system finally got tired of watching people be turned into suspects for sport and decided to hand over the receipts. In the end, the most dangerous thing for a person like that store manager was not a confrontation in public. It was a record in private, a trail of messages, a culture captured in plain language, a group chat that could not pretend it never happened.